History remembers wars as battles between nations, kings, and empires. But the American Civil War was different. It was not just about territory, armies, or governments. It was a war that tore a nation apart from within, a war where neighbor turned on neighbor and brother raised his weapon against brother. Between 1861 and 1865, the United States of America was engulfed in bloodshed, not against a foreign invader, but against itself. And at the heart of this conflict lay one of the darkest and most defining issues in human history: slavery. The story of the Civil War is not just about great generals and decisive battles. It is about families divided, lives destroyed, and a young nation struggling to define its very soul. To understand why this war erupted and how it changed the world forever, we must begin before the first shot was ever fired, when tension was already building in the heart of America. The roots of the American Civil War stretch back decades before 1861. In the early 1800s, the United States was rapidly expanding westward. Every new territory that joined the Union sparked the same heated question: would slavery be allowed there, or would it be banned? The South was built on plantations. Cotton, tobacco, and rice fueled its economy, and these crops demanded labor provided by millions of enslaved African Americans. By contrast, the North was moving toward industry, factories, and paid labor. The moral question of slavery divided the nation, but so too did the economic interests. Each compromise, like the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Compromise of 1850, only pushed the problem forward without solving it. But then came the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which let settlers in new territories vote on whether to allow slavery. Violence erupted almost immediately. Kansas became known as Bleeding Kansas, where pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers fought in the streets. Tension boiled higher with the Dred Scott decision in 1857, when the Supreme Court ruled that enslaved people were property, not citizens, and had no rights under the Constitution. Then came the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. Lincoln did not call for immediate abolition everywhere, but he was clear: slavery could not expand. To the South, this was unacceptable. Within months, Southern states began to secede from the Union, declaring themselves a new nation, the Confederate States of America. By April 1861, America was split in two. And when Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina, the Civil War officially began. This was not just a war of armies, it was a war of families. Across the border states, brothers chose different sides. In Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee, families were torn apart when one son fought for the Union and another for the Confederacy. The slogan, "Brother against brother," became tragically real. Towns that had lived in peace suddenly found neighbors accusing each other of betrayal. Ministers split congregations, teachers abandoned classrooms, and farms that once shared tools now faced each other with muskets. At the national level, border states like Kentucky and Maryland were deeply divided. President Lincoln knew if Maryland fell to the Confederacy, Washington, D.C., would be surrounded. He acted swiftly to secure it, even suspending civil liberties to prevent Confederate sympathizers from taking control. On the battlefields, the early battles revealed just how brutal the war would be. In July 1861, at the First Battle of Bull Run, Union troops marched confidently toward Virginia, believing the rebellion would collapse quickly. Instead, Confederate soldiers stood firm. Crowds of civilians had come from Washington to watch the show, expecting a quick Union victory. What they witnessed instead was chaos, retreat, and bloodshed. The war would not be short. It would be long, hard, and devastating. By 1862, the Union had blockaded southern ports, strangling the Confederate economy. Yet the South struck back with victories at battles like Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, led by generals like Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. But the war was not just in the East. In the West, Union General Ulysses S. Grant gained ground along the Mississippi River, capturing forts and pushing deeper into Confederate territory. Meanwhile, enslaved men and women saw the war as more than politics; it was their chance for freedom. Thousands escaped plantations, seeking Union lines where they became soldiers, laborers, and scouts. The war was transforming America forever. By 1863, the conflict had reached a turning point. Lincoln knew the war could not just be about preserving the Union, it had to be about ending slavery. On January 1, 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared all enslaved people in Confederate territory to be free. Though it did not immediately free everyone, it changed the meaning of the war. The Union was no longer simply fighting to preserve itself, it was fighting for human freedom. The move also allowed African Americans to officially join the Union Army. By the end of the war, nearly 200,000 black soldiers had fought, many sacrificing their lives for a country that had not yet fully recognized their equality. The South, however, dug in harder. The war would reach its deadliest year. In July 1863, Confederate forces under Robert E. Lee invaded the North, marching into Pennsylvania. At Gettysburg, the largest battle of the Civil War unfolded. For 3 days, 160,000 soldiers clashed in fields and hills. Cannon fire thundered, muskets cracked, and bayonets clashed in hand-to-hand combat. The turning point came with Pickett's charge, when Confederate soldiers marched across open fields toward Union lines, only to be cut down in devastating numbers. Lee's army was forced to retreat. The South would never again launch a full-scale invasion of the North. Gettysburg marked the high tide of the Confederacy and the beginning of its decline. Just months later, Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, a short but powerful speech reminding the nation that the war was about more than land. It was about a new birth of freedom. By 1864, Union General Grant had taken command of all Union armies. He believed in relentless pressure. While he fought Lee in Virginia, General William Tecumseh Sherman launched his infamous March to the Sea, cutting through Georgia. Sherman's army destroyed railroads, burned crops, and broke Confederate supply lines. It was a new kind of warfare, total war, that targeted not just soldiers, but the South's ability to sustain itself. The Confederacy was being squeezed from all sides. Its economy was collapsing, its railroads destroyed, and its people starving. Yet still, Lee and his army fought on. By April 1865, Lee's forces were surrounded. At Appomattox Courthouse, Lee met Grant and surrendered. The war that had raged for 4 long years, claiming more than 600,000 lives, was finally over. The Union had been preserved. Slavery was abolished. But the scars of the war would remain for generations. The Civil War was the deadliest conflict in American history. It destroyed cities, shattered families, and left a legacy of grief. But it also reshaped the nation. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th and 15th Amendments promised citizenship and voting rights. Though struggles for equality would continue for more than a century, the Civil War planted the seeds of freedom. The phrase "brother against brother" captures the pain of the conflict. It was a war fought not across oceans, but across fences, kitchens, and family tables. It was a war that forced America to confront its greatest sin and its deepest divide. And it was a war that proved, in Lincoln's words, that a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal could endure, even after being torn apart. The Civil War was more than battles, leaders, and speeches. It was the story of ordinary men and women, of enslaved people seeking freedom, of soldiers facing their own brothers across the battlefield. It was the story of a young nation tested to its very core and emerging forever changed. The United States would never be the same again.